Hi, I'm Will Butler-Adams and I'm CEO of Brompton Bicycle. We export about 80%, and in that 80%, key markets are Germany, Benelux, South Korea, Japan, the US.
Under the right circumstances, trade can be beneficial, but why is it necessary to have more trade?
Trade is beneficial if both sides get something out of it and if consumers get something out of it as well as producers. So if trade is generally seen to be good for economic growth, good for economic output, and good for living standards. So that would be the advantage of a good trade deal, provided it was a good trade deal.
Like in anything, there are pros and cons. But take, for example, the single market. The single market is nothing else than the greatest example for Europeans of free trade.
Today, the EU is the world's largest trading bloc, and Europe has 32 free trade agreements with other countries. This means that the EU is benefiting from one of the most open economies in the world. More than 70% of imports are entering the EU at zero or reduced tariffs. So our market is already open, and by negotiating free trade agreements, we're trying to open new markets to be able to increase our exports. Take, for example, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, TTIP. After a long process of negotiations, the final decision to adopt the agreement comes with a double democratic guarantee. This means that TTIP will never become a reality if both the European Parliament and the Council do not agree on it. But why would our democratic representatives vote in favour of it? Exports between the EU and the US already provide for about 5 million jobs across Europe, and these jobs tend to be more highly skilled and better paid. The US and the EU are the world's two biggest markets, and trade between them is already huge. As much as 893 billion euros worth of goods and services are traded between them every year.
One of the challenges which we have in the US is that the price is different because we get taxed. We need more free trade because that's then the customer having a level playing field. They understand. At the moment, they don't understand different tariffs. If we can we're currently paying about 11% in the US for bikes and about 20% for luggage. We really can't even sell our luggage in the US because it's not competitive.
The problem is with the small and medium-sized enterprises, because they don't have enough resources to be competitive in the market without suffering for trade barriers.
And because the tariff is at 20% for luggage, bags, we're selling a bike without the bit that makes it really fun, the bag, because it's so expensive. And the customer doesn't understand it. And then they see in the UK, it's like this cheap. And they're like, well, are you ripping us off or what's going on?
So TTIP can help lower tariffs and increase economic growth. But the comprehensive agreement will go further than just removing tariffs. TTIP will actually aim to open up markets on services, investment, public procurement, and include regulatory issues.
I mean, TTIP itself is a second best solution to a trade liberalisation deal done multilaterally through the WTO. So we have a TTIP negotiation because the WTO Doha round failed.
So TTIP is about setting rules for international trade. But who will set the global standards for the regulation of goods and services in the 21st century? The EU and the US are more likely to be successful if they work together, and that means projecting the values we share, from the fundamentals of democracy and the rule of law to key areas such as the environment and social standards.
In a globalized world, we have reached a moment where the WTO has not delivered what it had promised.
If Europe does not lead, others will. 90% of growth is expected to take place in Asia. As the emerging economies surge, the EU will no longer be in the same position of strength in 10 years' time. Free trade around the world is happening, with or without the EU. Look at the currently negotiated China-Japan-South Korea Free Trade Agreement, or the Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP. Australia alone has as much as 10 free trade agreements. And the decisions made outside our borders are going to affect us more in the future, especially as the world economy becomes more integrated. If we want to team up with someone to set the rules, we should do it with the partner we have most in common with, the USA. But of course, procedures and regulations carried out by American and European authorities vary, even if they have the same outcome. So take this security issue on planes. In the EU, you can take up to 100 millilitres of liquids onto a plane. In the US, it's 3 ounces. These quantities are not exactly the same, but they achieve the same objective to keep us safe. Therefore, they have been recognised as equivalent. That's the system of mutual recognition. In the current negotiations, regulators are looking at other cases in specific industrial sectors where a similar result can be achieved. If and only if the outcome is a safe product, the unnecessary bureaucracy will be reduced. Let's have a look at a concrete business example on how European business could profit from this.
My name is Martin Welker. I'm the CEO and owner of Schutte, a machine tool builder. We have about 600 employees in Cologne.
The small and medium-sized enterprises are much more affected by the fact that we have barriers.
Actually, 2 barriers. The one is tariffs, and the other ones are the non-tariff barriers, which is mostly bureaucracy.
If you were able to make it easier for companies to export across the Atlantic in either direction, with fewer regulatory barriers, that would be helpful.
What we are looking at is in different areas, mainly technical, where we can recognize each other's standards. And if we can agree that one test is enough, then we could save quite a lot of money and time.
Take, for example, the neutral wire in a machine tool. In Europe, the neutral wire is blue. In America, depending on the state, actually depending on the county, it gives you 45 different options, but it can't be blue. TTIP could indeed change all the bureaucracy we put into finding out what regulation applies, and we wouldn't have to exchange our blue wire into whatever wire color is necessary. And I think we can agree on the fact that the wire color does not increase safety or decrease safety in any respect.
There are many areas where Europe and the US can find common ground to cooperate better. But there are also some areas, some red lines, the European people are clearly opposed to compromise on. Red lines for the negotiations are clearly defined.
Those hormones that are forbidden in the EU will still be forbidden.
We won't be invaded by chlorine chicken or hormone beef.
These mandates are very clear. That means there can't be and there won't be a lowering of standards.
That's what opponents of TTIP really worry about, that this is a deal which essentially just benefits the corporate side of the equation and not consumers, not workers.
Genetically modified food is one main concern. In the USA, the use of GMOs in feed and for consumption is common. For Europeans, this is unthinkable.
I think there are some issues which are going to prove so difficult that they may have to be excluded from the deal. I think GMO foods in Europe, I think that's going to be a pretty hard sell, to be honest.
That is why the European institutions clearly stated that GMOs will be excluded from TTIP.
We have a very special system of allowing GMO products in Europe, whether they come from the US or elsewhere. They have to be approved by EFSA, the authority. If they are approved, then they can be sold here. If they're not approved, they cannot. That will not change with TTIP.
An open and well-informed debate about TTIP is crucial. Free trade can be beneficial if it is done in the right way. European business supports the debate about European trade agreements with other economies in the world.